following is a conversation with Elon Musk, DJ Saw, Matthew MacDougall, Bliss Chapman, and Noland Arbaugh about Neuralink and the future of humanity. It is a very interesting question for a super intelligent species. What use are humans?
I think there is some argument for humans as a source of will.
Will,
yeah, source of will or purpose. So if you consider the human mind as being essentially there's the primitive limbic elements, which basically even like reptiles have, and there's the cortex, that's the thinking and planning part of the brain. Now, the cortex is much smarter than the limbic system, and yet is largely in service to the limbic system. It's trying to make the limbic system happy. I mean, the sheer amount of compute that's gone into people trying to get laid is insane. Without actually seeking procreation, they're just literally trying to do the sort of simple motion, and they get a kick out of it.
Yeah.
So this simple, which in the abstract rather absurd motion, which is sex, the cortex is putting a massive amount of compute into trying to figure out how to do that.
So like 90% of distributed compute of the human species is spent on trying to get laid, probably. Like
a massive
large
amount.
percentage.
Yeah. There's no purpose to most sex except hedonistic. It's just sort of a joy or whatever, dopamine release. Now, once in a while, it's procreation, but for humans, modern humans, it's mostly recreational. And so your cortex, much smarter than your limbic system, is trying to make the limbic system happy because the limbic system wants to have sex. So, or wants some tasty food or whatever the case may be. And then that is then further augmented by the tertiary system, which is your phone, your laptop, iPad, whatever, all your computing stuff. That's your tertiary layer. So you're actually already a cyborg. You have this tertiary compute layer, which is in the form of your computer with all the applications, all your compute devices. And so in the getting laid front, there's actually a massive amount of digital compute also trying to get laid. With like Tinder and whatever,
Yeah. So the compute that we humans have built is also participating.
Yeah. I mean, there's like gigawatts of compute going into getting laid, of digital compute.
Yeah. What if AGI was...
This is happening as we speak.
If we merge with AI, it's just going to expand the compute that we humans use.
Pretty much.
To try to get laid.
It's one of the things, certainly, yeah.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that yes, like is there a use for humans? Well, there's this fundamental question of what's the meaning of life? Why do anything at all? And so if our simple limbic system provides a source of will to do something, that then goes to our cortex, that then goes to our, tertiary compute layer, then, I don't know, it might actually be that the AI in a benign scenario is simply trying to make the human limbic system happy.
Yeah, it seems like the will is not just about the limbic system. There's a lot of interesting, complicated things in there. We also want power.
That's limbic too, I think.
But then we also want to, in a kind of cooperative way, alleviate the suffering in the world.
Not everybody does, but yeah, sure. Some people do.
As a group of humans, when we get together, we start to have this kind of collective intelligence that is more complex in its will than the underlying individual descendants of apes, right? So there's like other motivations, and that could be a really interesting source of an objective function for AGI.
Yeah. I mean, there are these sort of fairly cerebral or kind of higher level goals. I mean, for me, it's like, what's the meaning of life, or understanding the nature of the universe is of great interest to me, and hopefully to the AI, and that's the mission of XAI and Grok, is understand the universe.
So, do you think people, when you have a Neuralink with 10,000, 100,000 channels, most of the use cases will be communication with AI systems?
Well, if it's assuming that there are not, I mean, there's solving basic neurological issues that people have, if they've got damaged neurons in their spinal cord or neck, or as is the case with our first two patients, then this obviously the first order of business is solving fundamental neuron damage in the spinal cord, neck, or in the brain itself. So our second product is called Blindsight, which is to enable people who are completely blind, lost both eyes or optic nerve, or just can't see at all, to be able to see by directly triggering the neurons in the visual cortex. So we're just starting at the basics here. This is like very the simple stuff, relatively speaking, is solving neuron damage.
Mm-hmm.
It can also solve, I think, probably schizophrenia. If people have seizures of some kind, it could probably solve that. It could help with memory. There's like a kind of a tech tree, if you will, of like you got the basics. Like you need literacy before you can have, Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Do you have letters and alphabet? Okay, great. Words, then eventually you get sagas. So, I think there may be some, things to worry about in the future, but the first several years are really just solving basic neurological damage. Like for people who have essentially complete or near complete loss from the brain to the body, like Stephen Hawking would be an example, the Neuralink would be incredibly profound. Because, you can imagine if Stephen Hawking could communicate as fast as we're communicating, perhaps faster. And that's certainly possible. Probable, in fact. Likely, I'd say.
So there's a kind of dual track of medical and non-medical, meaning, so everything you've talked about could be applied to people who are non-disabled in the future?
The logical thing to do is, sensible thing to do is to start off solving basic neuron damage issues.
Yes.
Because there's obviously some risk with the new device. You can't get the risk down at zero. It's not possible. So you want to have the highest possible reward, given there's a certain irreducible risk. And if somebody's able to have a profound improvement in their communication, that's worth the risk.
As you get the risk down.
Yeah, as you get the risk down, and once the risk is down to if you have like thousands of people that have been using it for years, and the risk is minimal, then perhaps at that point you could consider saying, okay, let's aim for augmentation. Now I think we're actually going to aim for augmentation with people who have neuron damage. So we're not just aiming to give people a communication data rate equivalent to normal humans. We're aiming to give people who have, quadriplegic or maybe have complete loss of the connection to the brain and body, a communication data rate that exceeds normal humans. Mm-hmm. While we're in there, why not? Let's give people superpowers.
And the same for vision. As you restore vision, there could be aspects of that restoration that are superhuman.
Yeah. At first, the vision restoration will be low res. Because you have to say, like, how many neurons can you put in there and trigger, and you can do things where you adjust the electric field. So, like, even if you've got, say, 10,000 neurons, it's not just 10,000 pixels, because you can adjust the field between the neurons and do them in patterns in order to get, have say 10,000 electrodes effectively give you, I don't know, maybe like having a megapixel or a 10 megapixel situation. So, and then over time, I think you get to higher resolution than human eyes, and you could also see in different wavelengths. So, like Geordie LaForge from Star Trek, like the thing. You could just, like, do you want to see in radar? No problem. You can see ultraviolet, infrared, eagle vision, whatever you want.
And now, dear friends, here's DJ Saw, the co-founder, president, and COO of Neuralink. When did you first become fascinated by the human brain?
For me, I was always interested in understanding the purpose of things and how it was engineered to serve that purpose, whether it's organic or inorganic. Like we were talking earlier about your curtain holders. They serve a clear purpose and they were engineered with that purpose in mind. And, growing up, I had a lot of interest in seeing things, touching things, feeling things, and trying to really understand the root of how it was designed to serve that purpose. And, obviously, brain is just a fascinating organ that we all carry. It's an infinitely powerful machine that has intelligence and cognition that arise from it. And, we haven't even scratched the surface in terms of how all of that occurs. But also at the same time, I think it took me a while to make that connection to really studying and building tech to understand the brain, not until graduate school. There were a couple moments, key moments in my life where some of those, I think, influenced how the trajectory of my life got me to studying what I'm doing right now. One was growing up, both sides of my family, my grandparents had a very severe form of Alzheimer. And it's, incredibly debilitating conditions. Literally you're seeing someone's whole identity and their mind just losing over time. And I just remember thinking how both the power of the mind, but also how something like that could really lose your sense of identity.
It's fascinating that is one of the ways to reveal the power of a thing, by watching it lose the power.
Yeah, a lot of what we know about the brain actually comes from these cases where there are trauma to the brain or some parts of the brain that led someone to lose certain abilities. And as a result, there's some correlation and understanding of that part of the tissue being critical for that function. And it's an incredibly fragile organ, if you think about it that way, but also it's incredibly plastic and incredibly resilient in many different ways.
And by the way, the term plastic, as we'll use a bunch, means that it's adaptable. So neuroplasticity refers to the adaptability of the human brain.
Correct. Another key moment that sort of influenced how the trajectory of my life have shaped towards the current focus of my life has been during my teenage year when I came to the US. I didn't speak a word of English. There was a huge language barrier, and there was a lot of struggle to kind of connect with my peers around me because I didn't understand the artificial construct that we have created called language, specifically English in this case. And I remember feeling pretty isolated, not being able to connect with peers around me. So I spent a lot of time just on my own, reading books, watching movies. And I naturally sort of gravitated towards sci-fi books. I just found them really, really interesting. And also it was a great way for me to learn English. Some of the first set of books that I picked up are Ender's Game, the whole saga by Orson Scott Card, and Neuromancer from William Gibson, and Snow Crash from Neil Stephenson. And, movies like Matrix was coming out around that time point that really influenced how I think about the potential impact that technology can have for our lives in general. So fast track to my college years, I was always fascinated by just physical stuff, building physical stuff, and especially physical things that had some sort of intelligence. And, I studied electrical engineering during undergrad, and I started out my research in MEMS, so micro electromechanical systems, and really building these tiny nanostructures for temperature sensing. And I just found that to be just incredibly rewarding and fascinating subject to just understand how you can build something miniature like that again served a function and had a purpose. And then, I spent large majority of my college years basically building millimeter wave circuits for next-gen telecommunication systems, for imaging. And it was just something that I found very, very intellectually interesting, phase arrays, how the signal processing works for, any modern as well as next-gen telecommunication system, wireless and wireline. EM waves or electromagnetic waves are fascinating. how do you design antennas that are most efficient in a small footprint that you have? How do you make these things energy efficient? That was something that just consumed my intellectual curiosity. And that journey led me to actually apply to and find myself in a PhD program at UC Berkeley at kind of this consortium called the Berkeley Wireless Research Center that was precisely looking at building, at the time we called it XG, similar to 3G, 4G, 5G, but the next generation G system, and how you would design circuits around that to ultimately go on phones and basically any other devices that are wirelessly connected these days. So I was just absolutely just fascinated by how that entire system works and that infrastructure works. And then also during grad school, I had sort of the fortune of having a couple of research fellowships that led me to pursue whatever project that I want. And that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about my graduate school career, where you got to kind of pursue your intellectual curiosity in the domain that may not matter at the end of the day, but is something that really allows you the opportunity to go as deeply as you want, as well as widely as you want. And at the time, I was actually working on this project called the Smart Band-Aid. And the idea was that when you get a wound, there's a lot of other kind of proliferation of signaling pathway that cells follow to close that wound. And there were hypotheses that when you apply external electric field, you can actually accelerate the closing of that field by having, basically electrotaxing of the cells around that wound site. And specifically, not just for normal wound, there are chronic wounds that don't heal. So we were interested in building, some sort of a wearable patch that you could apply to kind of facilitate that healing process. And that was in collaboration with Professor Michelle Maharovitz, which was a great addition to kind of my thesis committee, and really shaped the rest of my PhD career.
So this would be the first time you interacted with biology, I suppose.
Correct. I mean, there were some peripheral, end application of the wireless imaging and telecommunication system that I was using for security and bioimaging, but this was a very clear, direct application to biology and biological system, and understanding the constraints around that, and really designing and engineering electrical solutions around it. So that was my first introduction, and that's also kind of how I got introduced to Michel. He's sort of known for remote control of beetles in the early 2000s.
How does Neuralink work? From the surgery to the implant to the signal and the decoding process, and the human being able to use the implant to actually affect the world outside. And all of this, I'm asking in the context of there's a gigantic historic milestone that Neuralink just accomplished that in January of this year, putting a Neuralink implant in the first human being, Noland. And there's been a lot to talk about there about his experience, because he's able to describe all the nuance and the beauty and the fascinating complexity of that experience, of everything involved. But on the technical level, how does Neuralink work?
Yeah, so there are three major components to the technology that we're building. One is the device, the thing that's actually recording these neural chatters. We call it N1 implant, or the link. And we have a surgical robot that's actually doing an implantation of these tiny, tiny wires that we call threads that are smaller than human hair. And once everything is surgerized, you have these neural signals, these spiking neurons that are coming out of the brain, and you need to have some sort of software to decode what the users intend to do with that. So there's what's called a Neuralink application, or B1 app, that's doing that translation. It's running the very, very simple machine learning model that decodes these inputs that are neural signals, and then convert it to a set of outputs that allows our participant, first participant Noland, to be able to control a cursor on the screen.
And this is done wirelessly.
So we our implant is actually two-part. The link has these flexible tiny wires called threads that have multiple electrodes along its length, and they're only inserted into the cortical layer, which is about 3 to 5 millimeters in a human brain, in the motor cortex region. That's where the kind of the intention for movement lies in. And we have 64 of these threads, each thread having 16 electrodes along, the span of 3 to 4 millimeters, separated by 200 microns. So you can actually record along the depth of the insertion. And based on that signal, there's custom, integrated circuit or ASIC that we built that amplifies the neural signals that you're recording and then digitizing it, and then has some mechanism for detecting whether there was an interesting event, that is a spiking event, and decide to send that or not send that through Bluetooth to an external device, whether it's a phone or a computer that's running this Neuralink application.
So there's onboard signal processing already just to decide whether this is an interesting event or not. So there is some computational power on board in addition to the human brain.
Yeah, so it does the signal processing to kind of really compress the amount of signal that you're recording. So we have a total of 1,000 electrodes sampling at just under 20 kilohertz with 10 bit each. So that's 200 megabits that's coming through to the chip from 1,000 channel simultaneous neural recording. And that's quite a bit of data. And there are technology available to send that off wirelessly, but being able to do that in a very, very thermally constrained environment that is a brain. So there has to be some amount of compression that happens to send off only the interesting data that you need, which in this particular case for motor decoding is occurrence of a spike or not, and then being able to use that to decode the intended cursor movement. So the implant itself processes it, figures out whether a spike happened or not with our spike detection algorithm, and then sends it off, packages it, send it off through Bluetooth to an external device that then has the model to decode, okay, based on these spiking inputs, did Noland wish to go up, down, left, right, or click, or right click, or whatever?
All of this is really fascinating, but let's stick on the N1 implant itself. So the thing that's in the brain. So I'm looking at a picture of it. There's an enclosure. There's a charging coil. So we didn't talk about the charging, which is fascinating. The battery, the power electronics, the antenna. Then there's the signal processing electronics. I wonder if there's more kinds of signal processing you can do. That's another question. And then there's the threads themselves with the enclosure on the bottom. So maybe to ask about the charging. So there's an external charging device.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's an external charging device. The second part of the implant, the threads are the ones, again, just the last 3 to 5 millimeters are the ones that are actually penetrating the cortex. Yeah. Rest of it is, actually most of the volume is occupied by the battery, rechargeable battery. It's about the size of a quarter. I actually have a device here if you want to take a look at it. This is the flexible thread component of it, and then this is the implant. So it's about the size of a US quarter. It's about 9 millimeter thick. So basically, this implant, once you have the craniectomy and the durectomy, threads are inserted, and the hole that you created, this craniectomy, gets replaced with that. So basically, that thing plugs that hole, and you can screw in these self-drilling cranial screws to hold it in place. And at the end of the day, once you have the skin flap over, there's only about 2 to 3 millimeters that's, obviously transitioning off of the top of the implant to where the screws are. And that's the minor bump that you have.
Those threads look tiny. That's incredible. That is really incredible. And now, dear friends, here's Matthew MacDougall, the head neurosurgeon at Neuralink. When did you first become fascinated with the human brain?
Since forever, as far back as I can remember, I've been interested in the human brain. I mean, I was, a thoughtful kid and a bit of an outsider. And you sit there thinking about what the most important things in the world are in your little tiny adolescent brain. And the answer that I came to, that I converged on, was that all of the things you can possibly conceive of as things that are important for human beings to care about are literally contained, in the skull. Both the perception of them and their relative values and, the solutions to all our problems and all of our problems are all contained in the skull. And if we knew more about how that worked, how the brain encodes information and generates desires and generates agony and suffering, we could do more about it. You think about all the really great triumphs in human history. You think about all the really horrific tragedies. You think about the Holocaust. You think about any prison full of human stories, and all of those problems boil down to neurochemistry. So if you get a little bit of control over that, you provide people the option to do better. In the way I read history, the way people have dealt with having better tools is that they most often, in the end, do better, with huge asterisks. But I think it's an interesting, a worthy, and noble pursuit to give people more options, more tools.
Yeah, that's a fascinating way to look at human history. You just imagine all these neurobiological mechanisms, Stalin, Hitler, all of these, Genghis Khan, all of them just had like a brain. It's just a bunch of neurons, like a few tens of billions of neurons, gaining a bunch of information over a period of time. They have a set of module that does language and memory and all that. And from there, in the case of those people, they're able to murder millions of people.
Yeah.
And all that coming from, there's not some glorified notion of a dictator of this enormous mind or something like this. It's just the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of that has to do with how well people like that can organize those around them.
Other brains.
Yeah. And so I always find it interesting to look to primatology, look to our closest non-human relatives for clues as to how humans are going to behave and what particular humans are able to achieve. And so you look at chimpanzees and bonobos, and they're similar but different in their social structures, particularly. And I went to Emory in Atlanta and studied under Franz de Waal, the great Franz de Waal, who was kind of the leading primatologist, who recently died. And his work at looking at chimps through the lens of, how you would watch an episode of Friends and understand the motivations of the characters interacting with each other. He would look at a chimp colony and basically apply that lens. I'm massively oversimplifying it. If you do that, instead of just saying, subject 473, through his feces at subject 471, you talk about them in terms of their human struggles, accord them the dignity of themselves as actors with understandable goals and drives, what they want out of life. And primarily it's, the things we want out of life: food, sex, companionship, power. You can understand chimp and bonobo behavior in the same lights much more easily. And I think doing so gives you the tools you need to reduce human behavior from the kind of false complexity that we layer onto it with language, and look at it in terms of, these humans are looking for companionship, sex, food, power. And I think that's a pretty powerful tool to have in understanding human behavior.
And I just went to the Amazon jungle for a few weeks, and it's a very visceral reminder that a lot of life on Earth is just trying to get laid.
Yeah.
They're all screaming at each other.
Yeah.
Like I saw a lot of monkeys, and they're just trying to impress each other. Or maybe if there's a battle for power, but a lot of the battle for power has to do with them getting laid.
Right. Breeding rights often go with alpha status. And so if you can get a piece of that, then you're going to do okay.
And would like to think that we're somehow fundamentally different, but especially when it comes to primates, we really aren't, we can use fancier poetic language, but maybe some of the underlying drives that motivate us are similar.
Yeah, I think that's true.
How have all the surgeries that you've done over the years, the people you've helped, and the stakes, the high stakes that you've mentioned, how has that changed your understanding of life and death?
Yeah. It gives you a very visceral sense, and this may sound trite, but it gives you a very visceral sense that death is inevitable. On one hand, you are, as a neurosurgeon, you're deeply involved in these like just hard to fathom tragedies. Young parents dying, leaving, a 4-year-old behind, say. And on the other hand, it takes the sting out of it a bit, because you see how just mind-numbingly universal death is. There's zero chance that I'm going to avoid it. I know, techno-optimists right now and longevity buffs right now would disagree on that 0.000% estimate. But I don't see any chance that our generation is going to avoid it. Entropy is a powerful force, and we are very ornate, delicate, brittle DNA machines that aren't up to the cosmic ray bombardment that we're subjected to. So, on the one hand, every human that has ever lived died or will die. On the other hand, it's just one of the hardest things to imagine inflicting on anyone that you love is having them gone. I mean, I'm sure you've had friends that aren't living anymore, and it's hard to even think about them. And so I wish I had, arrived at the point of nirvana where, death doesn't have a sting. I'm not worried about it, but I can at least say that I'm comfortable with the certainty of it. If not having found out how to take the tragedy out of it when I think about, my kids, either not having me or me not having them, or my wife.
Maybe I've come to accept the intellectual certainty of it, but and maybe the pain that comes with losing the people you love. I don't think I've come to understand the existential aspect of it, like that this is going to end. And I don't mean like in some trite way. I mean like it certainly feels like it's not going to end. Like you live life like it's not going to end.
Right.
And the fact that this light that's shining, this consciousness is going to no longer be in one moment, maybe today. It's like it fills me when I really am able to load all that in with Ernest Becker's terror. Like it's a real fear. I think people aren't always honest with how terrifying it is.
Yeah.
I think the more you are able to really think through it, the more terrifying it is. It's not such a simple thing. Oh, well, it's the way life is. And if you really can load that in, it's hard. But I think that's why the Stoics did it, because it like helps you get your shit together and be like this. Well, like the moment, every single moment you're alive is just beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying that it's gonna end. And it's like you're like almost like you're shivering in the cold. A child, helpless, this kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And then it makes you, when you have warmth, when you have the safety, when you have the love, to really appreciate it. I feel like sometimes in your position, when you mentioned armor, just to see death, it might make you not be able to see that, the finiteness of life, because if you kept looking at that, it might break you. So it's good to know that you're kind of still struggling with that. There's the neurosurgeon, and then there's a human.
Yeah.
And the human is still able to struggle with that and feel the fear of that and the pain of that.
Yeah, it definitely makes you ask the question of how many of these can you see, and not say I can't do this anymore. But I mean, you said it well. I think it gives you an opportunity to just appreciate that you're alive today. And I've got 3 kids and an amazing wife, and I'm really happy. Things are good. I get to help on a project that I think matters. I think it moves us forward. I'm a very lucky person.
It's the early steps of a potentially gigantic leap for humanity. It's a really interesting one. And it's cool because like you read about all this stuff in history where it's like the early days. I've been reading, before going to the Amazon, I would read about explorers that would go and explore even the Amazon jungle for the first time. It's just, those are the early steps.
Yeah.
Or early steps into space, early steps in any discipline, in physics and mathematics. And it's cool because this is like on the grand scale, these are the early steps into delving deep into the human brain. So not just observing the brain, but be able to interact with the human brain.
Yeah.
It's going to help a lot of people, but it also might help us understand what the hell's going on in there.
Yeah. I think ultimately we want to give people more levers that they can pull, right? Like you want to give people options. If you can give someone a dial that they can turn on how happy they are, I think that makes people really uncomfortable. But now talk about major depressive disorder, talk about people that are committing suicide at an alarming rate in this country, and try to justify that queasiness in that light of you can give people a knob to take away suicidal ideation, suicidal intention. I would give them that knob. I don't know how you justify not doing that.
Yeah, you can think about like all the suffering that's going on in the world. Like every single human being that's suffering right now, it's like it'll be a glowing red dot. The more suffering, the more it's glowing, and you just see the map of human suffering. And any technology that allows you to dim that light of suffering on a grand scale is pretty exciting. Because there's a lot of people suffering, and most of them suffer quietly. Yeah. And we turn we look away too often. And we should remember those that are suffering, because once again, most of them are suffering quietly.
Well, and on a grander scale, the fabric of society. People have a lot of complaints about how our social fabric is working or not working, how our politics is working or not working. Those things are made of neurochemistry too, in aggregate, right? Like our politics is composed of individuals with human brains, and the way it works or doesn't work is potentially tunable, in the sense that, I don't know, say, remove our addictive behaviors or tune our addictive behaviors for social media, or our addiction to outrage, our addiction to sharing the most angry political tweet we can find. I don't think that leads to a functional society. And if you had options for people to moderate that maladaptive behavior, there could be huge benefits to society. Maybe we could all work together a little more harmoniously toward useful ends.
There's a sweet spot, like you mentioned. You don't want to completely remove all the dark sides of human nature, because those kind of are somehow necessary to make the whole thing work. But there's a sweet spot.
Yeah, I agree. You gotta suffer a little, just not so much that you lose hope.
Yeah. And now, dear friends, here's Bliss Chapman, brain interface software lead at Neuralink. You told me that you've met hundreds of people with spinal cord injuries or with ALS, and that your motivation for helping at Neuralink is grounded in wanting to help them. Can you describe this motivation?
Yeah. First, just a thank you to all the people I've gotten a chance to speak with for sharing their stories with me. I don't think there's any world really in which I can share their stories in as powerful a way as they can. But just I think to summarize at a very high level, what I hear over and over again is that people with ALS or severe spinal cord injury in a place where they basically can't move physically anymore, really at the end of the day are looking for independence. And that can mean different things for different people. For some folks, it can mean the ability just to be able to communicate again independently without needing to wear something on their face, without needing a caretaker to be able to put something in their mouth. For some folks, it can mean independence to be able to work again, to be able to navigate a computer digitally efficiently enough to be able to get a job, to be able to support themselves, to be able to move out and ultimately be able to support themselves after their family maybe isn't there anymore to take care of them. And for some folks, it's as simple as just being able to respond to their kid in time before they, run away or get interested in something else. And these are deeply personal and sort of very human problems. And what strikes me again and again when talking with these folks is that this is actually an engineering problem. This is a problem that with the right resources, with the right team, we can make a lot of progress on. And at the end of the day, I think that's a deeply inspiring message and something that makes me excited to get up every day.
So it's both an engineering problem in terms of a BCI, for example, that can give them capabilities where they can interact with the world. But also on the other side, it's an engineering problem for the rest of the world to make it more accessible for people living with quadriplegia.
Yeah. And actually, I'll take a broad view sort of lens on this for a second. I think I'm very in favor of anyone working in this problem space. So beyond BCI, I'm happy and excited and willing to support in any way I can folks working on eye tracking systems, working on speech to text systems, working on head trackers or mouse sticks or quad sticks. And I've met many engineers and folks in the community that do exactly those things. And I think for the people we're trying to help, it doesn't matter what the complexity of the solution is as long as the problem is solved. And I want to emphasize that there can be many solutions out there that can help with these problems. And BCI is one of a collection of such solutions. So BCI in particular, I think, offers several advantages here. And I think the folks that recognize this immediately are usually the people who have spinal cord injury or some form of paralysis. Usually you don't have to explain to them why this might be something that could be helpful. It's usually pretty self-evident. But for the rest of us, folks that don't live with severe spinal cord injury or who don't know somebody with ALS, it's not often obvious why you would want a brain implant to be able to connect and navigate a computer. And it's surprisingly nuanced to the degree that I've learned a huge amount just working with Noland in the first Neuralink clinical trial and understanding from him and his words why this device is impactful for him. And it's a nuanced topic. It can be the case that even if you can achieve the same thing, for example, with a mouse stick when navigating a computer, he doesn't have access to that mouse stick every single minute of the day. He only has access when someone is available to put it in front of him. And so a BCI can really offer a level of independence and autonomy that if it wasn't literally physically part of your body, it would be hard to achieve in any other way.
So there's a lot of fascinating aspects to what it takes to get Nolan to be able to control a cursor on the screen with his mind. You texted me something that I just love. You said, I was part of the team that interviewed and selected P1. I was in the operating room during the first human surgery, monitoring live signals coming out of the brain. I work with the user basically every day to develop new UX paradigms, decoding strategies, and I was part of the team that figured out how to recover useful BCI to new world record levels when the signal quality degraded. We'll talk about, I think, every aspect of that, but just zooming out, what was it like to be part of that, part of that team and part of that historic first?
Yeah, I think for me, this is something I've been excited about for close to 10 years now. And so to be able to be even just some small part of making it a reality is extremely exciting. A couple maybe special moments during that whole process that I'll never really truly forget. One of them is during the actual surgery. At that point in time, I know Nolan quite well. I know his family And so I think the initial reaction when Noland is rolled into the operating room is just a, oh shit kind of reaction. But at that point, muscle memory kicks in and you sort of go into, you let your body just do all the talking. And I have the lucky job in that particular procedure to just be in charge of monitoring the implant. So my job is to sit there, to look at the signals coming off the implant, to look at the live brain data streaming off the device as threads are being inserted into the brain, and just to basically observe and make sure that nothing is going wrong, or that there's no red flags or fault conditions that we need to go and investigate or pause the surgery to debug. And because I had that sort of spectator view of the surgery, I had a slightly removed perspective than I think most folks in the room. I got to sit there and think to myself, wow, that brain is moving a lot. When you look inside the little craniectomy that we stick the threads in, one thing that most people don't realize is the brain moves. The brain moves a lot when you breathe, when your heart beats, and you can see it visibly. So, that's something that I think was a surprise to me and very, very exciting to be able to see someone's brain who you physically know and have talked with at length actually pulsing and moving inside their skull.
And they used that brain to talk to you previously. Yes. And now it's right there moving.
Yep.
Actually, I didn't realize that in terms of the thread sending. So the Neuralink implant is active during surgery. So, and one thread at a time, you're able to start seeing the signal.
Yeah.
So that's part of the way you test that the thing is working.
Yeah. So actually, in the operating room, right after we sort of finished all the thread insertions, I started collecting what's called broadband data. So broadband is basically the most raw form of signal you can collect from a Neuralink electrode. It's essentially a measurement of the local field potential, or the voltage essentially measured by that electrode. And we have a certain mode in our application that allows us to visualize where detected spikes are. So it visualizes sort of where in the broadband signal, in its very, very raw form of the data, a neuron is actually spiking. And so one of these moments that I'll never forget as part of this whole clinical trial is seeing live in the operating room, while he's still under anesthesia, beautiful spikes being shown in the application, just streaming live to a device I'm holding in my hand.
So this is no signal processing, the raw data, and then the signals processing is on top of it. You're seeing the spikes detected.
Right, yeah.
And that's a UX too.
Yes.
That looks beautiful as well.
During that procedure, there was actually a lot of cameramen in the room, so they also were curious and wanted to see. There's several neurosurgeons in the room who are all just excited to see robots taking their job. And they're all, crowded around a small little iPhone watching this live brain data stream out of his brain.
What was that like, seeing the robot do some of the surgery? So the computer vision aspect where it detects all the spots that avoid the blood vessels, and then obviously with human supervision, then actually doing the really high precision connection of the threads to the brain.
Yeah, it's a good question. My answer is going to be pretty lame here, but it was boring.
Yeah.
I've seen it so many times. Yeah, that's exactly how you want surgery to be. You want it to be boring.
Yeah.
Because I've seen it so many times. I've seen the robot do this surgery literally hundreds of times. And so it was just one more time.
Yeah, all the practice surgeries and the proxies. And this is just another day.
Yeah.
So what about when Nolan woke up? Well, do you remember a moment where he was able to move the cursor, not move the cursor, but get signal from the brain such that it was able to show that there's a connection?
Yeah. Yeah. So we are quite excited to move as quickly as we can. And Noland was really, really excited to get started. He wanted to get started actually the day of surgery. But we waited till the next morning, very patiently. It's a long night. And the next morning in the ICU, where he was recovering, he wanted to get started and actually start to understand what kind of signal we can measure from his brain. And maybe for folks who are not familiar with the Neuralink system, we implant the Neuralink system, or the Neuralink implant, in the motor cortex. So the motor cortex is responsible for representing things like motor intent. So if you imagine closing and opening your hand, that kind of signal representation would be present in the motor cortex. If you imagine moving your arm back and forth or wiggling a pinky, this sort of signal can be present in the motor cortex. So one of the ways we start to sort of map out what kind of signal do we actually have access to in any particular individual's brain is through this task called body mapping. And body mapping is where you essentially present a visual to the user and you say, hey, imagine doing this. And the visual is, a 3D hand opening and closing, or index finger modulating up and down. And you ask the user to imagine that. And obviously you can't see them do this because they're paralyzed. So you can't see them actually move their arm. But while they do this task, you can record neural activity, and you can basically offline model and check, can I predict or can I detect the modulation corresponding with those different actions? And so we did that task and we realized, hey, there's actually some modulation associated with some of his hand motion, which was the first indication that, okay, we can potentially use that modulation to do useful things in the world. For example, control a computer cursor. And he started playing with it, the first time we showed him it. And we actually just took the same live view of his brain activity and put it in front of him. And we said, hey, you tell us what's going on. We're not you. You're able to imagine different things. And we know that it's modulating some of these neurons. So you figure out for us what that is actually representing. And so he played with it for a bit. He was like, I don't quite get it yet. He played for a bit longer. And he said, oh, when I move this finger, I see this particular neuron start to fire more. And I said, okay, prove it. Do it again. And so he said, okay, 3, 2, 1, boom. And the minute he moved, you can see like instantaneously, this neuron is firing. Single neuron, I can tell you the exact channel number if you're interested. It's stuck in my brain now forever. But that single channel firing was a beautiful indication that it was behaviorally modulated neural activity that could then be used for downstream tasks like decoding a computer cursor.
And when you say single channel, is that associated with a single electrode?
Yeah, so channel and electrode are interchangeable.
And there's 1,024 of those.
1,024, yeah.
It's incredible that works. That really, when I was learning about all this and like loading it in, it was just blowing my mind that the intention, you can visualize yourself moving the finger, that can turn into a signal. And the fact that you can then skip that step and visualize the cursor moving or have the intention of the cursor moving and that leading to a signal that can then be used to move the cursor. There is so many exciting things there to learn about the brain, about the way the brain works. The very fact of their existing signal that can be used is really powerful.
Yep.
But it feels like that's just like the beginning of figuring out how that signal can be used really, really effectively. I should also just, there's so many fascinating details here, but you mentioned the body mapping step. At least in the version I saw that Noland was showing off, there's like a super nice interface, like a graphical interface.
Yeah.
Like, it just felt like I was like in the future because it like, I guess it visualizes you moving the hand.
Yep.
And there's a very like a sexy, polished interface that hello. Yeah. I don't know if there's a voice component, but it just felt like it's like when you wake up in a really nice video game and this is a tutorial at the beginning of that video game.
Yeah.
This is what you're supposed to do. It's cool.
No, I mean, the future should feel like the future.
But it's not easy to pull that off. I mean, it needs to be simple, but not too simple.
Yeah, and I think the UX design component here is underrated for BCI development in general. There's a whole interaction effect between the ways in which you visualize an instruction to the user and the kinds of signal you can get back. And that quality of sort of your behavioral alignment to the neural signal is a function of how good you are at expressing to the user what you want them to do. And so, yeah, we spend a lot of time thinking about the UX, of how we build our applications, of how the decoder actually functions, the control surfaces it provides to the user. All these little details matter a lot.
What is the app? So there's an implant that's wirelessly communicating with any digital device that has an app installed.
Yep.
So maybe can you tell me at high level what the app is, what the software is outside of the brain?
Yeah. So maybe working backwards from the goal. The goal is to help someone with paralysis, in this case, Noland, be able to navigate his computer independently. And we think the best way to do that is to offer them the same tools that we have to navigate our software, because we don't want to have to rebuild an entire software ecosystem for the brain, at least not yet. Maybe someday you can imagine there's UXs that are built natively for BCI, but in terms of what's useful for people today, I think most people would prefer to be able to just control mouse and keyboard inputs to all the applications that they want to use for their daily jobs, for communicating with their friends, etc. And so the job of the application is really to translate this wireless stream of brain data coming off the implant into control of the computer. And we do that by essentially building a mapping from brain activity to sort of the HID inputs to the actual hardware. So HID is just the protocol for communicating like input device events. So for example, move mouse to this position or press this key down. And so that mapping is fundamentally what the app is responsible for. But there's a lot of nuance of how that mapping works that we spend a lot of time to try to get right. And we're still in the early stages of a long journey to figure out how to do that optimally. So one part of that process is decoding. So decoding is this process of taking the statistical patterns of brain data that's being channeled across this Bluetooth connection to the application and turning it into, for example, a mouse movement. And that decoding step, you can think of it in a couple different parts. So similar to any machine learning problem, there's a training step and there's an inference step. The training step in our case is a very intricate behavioral process where the user has to imagine doing different actions. So for example, they'll be presented a screen with a cursor on it, and they'll be asked to push that cursor to the right. Then imagine pushing that cursor to the left, push it up, push it down. We can basically build up a pattern, or using any sort of modern ML method, a mapping of given this brain data and that imagined behavior, map one to the other. And then at test time, you take that same pattern matching system. In our case, it's a deep neural network, and you run it, and you take the live stream of brain data coming off their implant, you decode it by pattern matching to what you saw at calibration time, and you use that for control of the computer. Now, a couple like sort of rabbit holes that I think are quite interesting. One of them has to do with how you build that best template matching system, because there's a variety of behavioral challenges and also debugging challenges when you're working with someone who's paralyzed. Because again, fundamentally, you don't observe what they're trying to do. You can't see them attempt to move their hand. And so you have to figure out a way to instruct the user to do something and validate that they're doing it correctly, such that then you can downstream build with confidence the mapping between the neural spikes and the intended action. And by doing the action correctly, what I really mean is at the level of resolution of what neurons are doing. So if in an ideal world, you could get a signal of behavioral intent that is ground truth accurate at the scale of sort of 1 millisecond resolution, then with high confidence, I could build a mapping from my neural spikes to that behavioral intention. But the challenge is, again, that you don't observe what they're actually doing. And so there's a lot of nuance to how you build user experiences that give you more than just sort of a coarse, on average, correct representation of what the user's intending to do. If you want to build the world's best mouse, you really want it to be as responsive as possible. You want it to be able to do exactly what the user's intending at every sort of step along the way, not just on average be correct when you're trying to move it from left to right. And building a behavioral sort of calibration game or sort of software experience that gives you that level of resolution is what we spend a lot of time working on.
So the calibration process, the interface, has to encourage precision, meaning like whatever it does, it should be super intuitive, that the next thing the human is going to likely do is exactly that intention that you need, and only that intention.
Yeah.
And you don't have any feedback except that may be speaking to you afterwards, what they actually did. You can't, oh yeah.
Right.
So that's fundamentally, that is a really exciting UX challenge, because that's all on the UX. It's not just about being friendly or nice or usable.
Yeah.
It's like
User experience is how it works.
it's how it works.
Yeah.
For the calibration, and calibration, at least at this stage of Neuralink, is like fundamental to the operation of the thing. And not just calibration, but continued calibration, essentially.
Yeah.
And now, dear friends, here's Noland Arbaugh, the first human being to have a Neuralink device implanted in his brain. You had a diving accident in 2016 that left you paralyzed with no feeling from the shoulders down. How did that accident change your life?
It was sort of a freak thing that happened. Imagine you're running into the ocean. Although this is a lake, but you're running into the ocean and you get to about waist high, and then you kind of like dive in, take the rest of the plunge under the wave or something. That's what I did. And then I just never came back up. Not sure what happened. I did it running into the water with a couple of guys. And so my idea of what happened is really just that I took like a stray fist, elbow, knee, foot, something to the side of my head. The left side of my head was sore for about a month afterwards. So must have taken a pretty big knock. And then they both came up and I didn't. And so I was face down in the water for a while. I was conscious. And then eventually just, realized I couldn't hold my breath any longer. And I keep saying took a big drink. People, I don't know if they like that I say that. It seems like I'm making light of it all, but it's just kind of how I am. And I don't know, like I'm a very relaxed, sort of stress-free person. I rolled with the punches for a lot of this. I kind of took it in stride. It's like, all right, well, what can I do next? How can I improve my life even a little bit? on a day-to-day basis at first, just trying to find some way to heal as much of my body as possible, to try to get healed, to try to get off a ventilator, learn as much as I could so I could somehow survive once I left the hospital. And then thank God I had like my family around me. If I didn't have my parents, my siblings, then I would have never made it this far. They've done so much for me, more than like I can ever thank them for, honestly. And a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people in my situation, their families either aren't capable of providing for them or honestly just don't want to. And so they get placed somewhere and, in some sort of home. So thankfully, I had my family. I have a great group of friends, a great group of buddies from college who have all rallied around me, and we're all still incredibly close. People always say, if you're lucky, you'll end up with one or two friends from high school that you keep throughout your life. I have about 10 or 12 from high school that have all stuck around, and we still get together, all of us, twice a year. We call it the spring series and the fall series. This last one we all did, we dressed up like X-Men. So I did a
Nice.
Professor Xavier, and it was freaking awesome. It was so good. So yeah, I have such a great support system around me. And so, being a quadriplegic isn't that bad. I get waited on all the time. People bring me food and drinks, and I get to sit around and watch as much TV and movies and anime as I want. I get to read as much as I want. I mean, it's great.
It's beautiful to see that you see the silver lining in all of this. But just going back, do you remember the moment when you first realized you're paralyzed from
Yeah.
the neck down?
Yep. I was face down in the water. Right when something hit my head, I tried to get up and I realized I couldn't move, and it just sort of clicked. I'm like, all right, I'm paralyzed, can't move. What do I do? If I can't get up, I can't flip over, can't do anything, then I'm going to drown eventually. And I knew I couldn't hold my breath forever. So I just held my breath and thought about it for maybe 10, 15 seconds. I've heard from other people that, like onlookers, I guess, the two girls that pulled me out of the water were two of my best friends. They were lifeguards. And one of them said that it looked like my body was sort of shaking in the water, like I was trying to flip over and stuff. But I knew immediately. And I just I realized that that's like what my situation was from here on out. Maybe if I got to the hospital, they'd be able to do something. When I was in the hospital, like right before surgery, I was trying to calm one of my friends down. I had like brought her with me from college to camp, and she was just bawling over me. And I was like, "Hey, it's gonna be fine. Like, don't worry." I was cracking some jokes to try to lighten the mood. The nurse had called my mom, and I was like, "Don't tell my mom. She's just gonna be stressed out. Call her after I'm out of surgery, because at least she'll have some answers then, like whether I live or not, really." And I didn't want her to be stressed through the whole thing, but I knew. And then when I first woke up after surgery, I was super drugged up. They had me on fentanyl like 3 ways, which was awesome. I don't recommend it, but I saw some crazy stuff on that fentanyl, and it was still the best I've ever felt on drugs. Medication, sorry, on medication. And I remember the first time I saw my mom in the hospital, I was just bawling. I had like ventilator in, like I couldn't talk or anything. And I just started crying because it was more like seeing her. Not that, I mean, the whole situation obviously was pretty rough, but it was just like seeing her face for the first time was pretty hard. But yeah, I never had like a moment of, man, I'm paralyzed. This sucks. I don't want to like be around anymore. It was always just, I hate that I have to do this, but like sitting here and wallowing isn't going to help.
So immediate acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Has there been low points along the way?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are days when I don't really feel like doing anything. Not so much anymore. Like, not for the last couple years. I don't really feel that way. I've more so just wanted to try to do anything possible to make my life better at this point. But at the beginning, there were some ups and downs. There were some really hard things to adjust to. First off, just like the first couple months, the amount of pain I was in was really, really hard. I mean, I remember screaming at the top of my lungs in the hospital because I thought my legs were on fire. And obviously, I can't feel anything, but it's all nerve pain. And so that was a really hard night. I asked them to give me as much pain meds as possible. They're like, you've had as much as you can have, so just kind of deal with it. Go to a happy place, sort of thing. So that was a pretty low point. And then every now and again, it's hard, like realizing things that I wanted to do in my life that I won't be able to do anymore. I always wanted to be a husband and father, and I just don't think that I could do it now as a quadriplegic. Maybe it's possible, but I'm not sure I would ever put someone I love through that, like having to take care of me and stuff. Not being able to, go out and play sports. I was a huge athlete growing up, so that was pretty hard. Just little things too, when I realize I can't do them anymore. Like there's something really special about being able to hold a book and smell a book, like the feel, the texture, the smell, like as you turn the pages, like I just love it. I can't do it anymore. And it's little things like that. The 2-year mark was pretty rough. 2 years is when they say you will get back basically as much as you're ever going to get back as far as movement and sensation goes. And so for the first 2 years, that was the only thing on my mind, was like try as much as I can to move my fingers, my hands, my feet, everything possible to try to get sensation and movement back. And then when the 2-year mark hit, so June 30th, 2018, I was really sad that that's kind of where I was. And then just randomly here and there, but I was never like depressed for long periods of time. Just it never seemed worthwhile to me.
What gave you strength?
My faith in God was a big one. My understanding that it was all for a purpose, and even if that purpose wasn't anything involving Neuralink, even if that purpose was, there's a story in the Bible about Job, and I think it's a really, really popular story about how Job, has all of these terrible things happen to him, and he praises God throughout the whole situation. I thought, and I think a lot of people think for most of their lives, that they are Job, that they're the ones going through something terrible, and they just need to, praise God through the whole thing, and everything will work out. At some point after my accident, I realized that I might not be Job, that I might be, one of his children that gets killed or kidnapped or taken from him. And so it's about terrible things that happen to those around you who you love. So maybe, in this case, my mom would be Job, and she has to get through something extraordinarily hard. And I just need to try and make it as best as possible for her, because she's the one that's really going through this massive trial. And that gave me a lot of strength. And obviously my family and my friends, they give me all the strength that I need on a day-to-day basis. So it makes things a lot easier having that great support system around me.
From everything I've seen of you online, your streams, and the way you are today, I really admire, let's say, your unwavering positive outlook on life. Has that always been this way?
Yeah. I've just always thought I could do anything I ever wanted to do. There was never anything too big. Like whatever I set my mind to, I felt like I could do it. I didn't want to do a lot. I wanted to like travel around and be sort of like a gypsy and like go work odd jobs. I had this dream of traveling around Europe and being like, I don't know, a shepherd in like Wales or Ireland, and then going and being a fisherman in Italy, doing all of these things for like a year. Like it's such like cliche things, but I just thought it would be so much fun to go and travel and do different things. And so I've always just seen the best in people around me too. And I've always tried to be good to people. And growing up with my mom too, she's like the most positive, energetic person in the world. And we're all just people. Like, I just get along great with people. I really enjoy meeting new people. And so, I just wanted to do everything. This is just kind of just how I've been.
It's just great to see that cynicism didn't take over, given everything you've been through.
Yeah.
That's was that like a deliberate choice you made that you're not going to let this keep you down?
Yeah, a bit. Also, like it's just kind of how I am. I just, like I said, I roll with the punches with everything. I always used to tell people, like, I don't stress about things much. And whenever I'd see people getting stressed, I would just say, like, it's not hard. Just don't stress about it. And like, that's all you need to do. And they're like, that's not how that works. I'm like, it works for me. Like, just don't stress and everything will be fine. Like, everything will work out. Obviously, not everything always goes well, and it's not like it all works out for the best all the time. But I just don't think stress has had any place in my life since I was a kid.
What was the experience like of you being selected to be the first human being to have a Neuralink device implanted in your brain? Were you scared? Excited?
No, it was cool. Um, like I was never afraid of it. I had to think through a lot. Should I do this? Like be the first person? I could wait until number 2 or 3 and get a better version of the Neuralink. Like the first one might not work. Maybe it's actually gonna kind of suck. It's going to be the worst version ever in a person. So why would I do the first one? Like I've already kind of been selected. I could just tell them, like, okay, find someone else and then I'll do number 2 or 3. Like I'm sure they would let me. They're looking for a few people anyways. But ultimately I was like, I don't know, there's something about being the first one to do something. It's pretty cool. I always thought that if I had the chance that I would like to do something for the first time, this seemed like a pretty good opportunity. And I was never scared. I think my like faith had a huge part in that. I always felt like God was preparing me for something. I almost wish it wasn't this, because I had many conversations with God about not wanting to do any of this as a quadriplegic. I told him, I'll go out and talk to people. I'll go out and travel the world and talk to, stadiums, thousands of people, give my testimony. I'll do all of it, but like heal me first. Don't make me do all of this in a chair. That sucks. And I guess he won that argument. I didn't really have much of a choice. I always felt like there was something going on. And to see how, I guess, easily I made it through the interview process and how quickly everything happened, how the stars sort of aligned with all of this, it just told me, like, as the surgery was getting closer, it just told me that, it was all meant to happen. It was all meant to be. And so I shouldn't be afraid of anything that's to come. And so I wasn't. I kept telling myself, like, you say that now, but as soon as the surgery comes, you're probably going to be freaking out. Like you're about to have brain surgery, and brain surgery is a big deal for a lot of people, but it's a even bigger deal for me. Like it's all I have left. The amount of times I've been like, thank you, God, that you didn't take my brain and my personality and my ability to think, my like love of learning, like my character, everything. Like, thank you so much. Like, as long as you left me that, then I think I can get by. And I was about to let people go, like root around in there, like, hey, we're gonna go like put some stuff in your brain, like hopefully it works out. And so it was something that gave me pause. But like I said, how smoothly everything went. I never expected for a second that anything would go wrong. Plus, the more people I met on the Barrows side and on the Neuralink side, they're just the most impressive people in the world. Like, I can't speak enough to how much I trust these people with my life and how impressed I am with all of them. And to see the excitement on their faces, to like walk into a room and roll into a room and see all of these people looking at me like we're so excited, like we've been working so hard on this and it's finally happening. It's super infectious, and it just makes me want to do it even more and to help them achieve their dreams. Like, I don't know, it's so rewarding, and I'm so happy for all of them, honestly.